but it just means that there's not much wiggle room for doing anything outside of the box. And I think, always being able to kind of expect what the Rush Warrior can do is kind of why it's still, I think, even though it's, probably tier 1, I don't think it'll ever push into that S tier type of deck where it's going to be like the most powerful deck in the metagame. It still does have its weaknesses. And we're going to get to see it showcase here in Game 1 versus Gabby's Miracle Rogue. And maybe the Pen Flanger come in handy in this one, just because a lot of times you do want to try and whittle down the board, because as I mentioned, the Rush Warrior does pretty much rely on board. And if you can keep the board under control, even though they can fight back with Rush tools, it does mean that they're going to go low on resources, just trying to kill all the little stuff that Rogue's going to do, and eventually will fall prey. But I do think this is a reasonable matchup for Rush Warrior.
Gabby's opening hand has a lot of options moving forward, as you were describing, but already taking the time to think about it right now. Is it worth ever pushing something out on turn 1? How does he want to layer his responses going to turn 2 and onwards? You can tell that McBannerface is an up-and-coming streamer. If you were to describe the occupation of the person in that room just without actually looking at McBanterface, it would either be someone that's opening up a nightclub in quarantine during the pandemic, or it's a Twitch streamer. One or the other. McBanterface, I really like it. There's some optical illusions going on. Trying to find a way to take down this Cult Neophyte. I'm not sure if it's threatening enough that warrants a Crab Rider, but Crab Rider is a lot more threatening when you keep it in the hand versus out of hand. Compared to Paladin. You mentioned conditioning. There's Ranthok. There's a lot of different ways you can buff up the Crab Rider from hand to make it really powerful. And at the same time, I think McBanterface doesn't necessarily want Cult Neophyte to stay on the board that much. This is a lot of deliberate thought being put into turn 1 from Gabby to coin out the Cult Neophyte. So I'm wondering if McBanterface feels like the need to remove it because Gabby was spending a coin on that.
Yeah, I don't think it's too necessary right now. As you mentioned, Crab Rider is quite good, even most of the time, even better when just played from hand when you can get some buffs on it. Gabby realized that he was going into a pretty decent curve. Cold Neophyte, there's not really that many spells that you want to block, so Cold Neophyte doesn't block a key turn, and it was because Gabby wanted to set up this turn, right, where McBanterface is most likely going to play a 2-drop, either Bumper Car or Crab Rider, so Gabby's going to be able to copy that with Foxy Frog, and he just wanted something on board to kind of force a play out of McBanterface to make that play possible, so I like what he did there.
It's a ton of stats for 3 mana crystals. Gabby's put out 8 power on the board with 7 health in total. But McBanterface does have tools to try and remove this with the Dark Moon Rider and the Crab Rider going to be able to disarm most of the board's power. So Gabby's aggression has not paid off immediately, but still is able to stick a 2-2. Or 2-3, rather. The awkward thing is, what do you do with this turn now?
It's too early for a Secret Passage. You don't want a 1-1 with Rush from Shadow Stepping to Vanessa Van Cleef. So, and that's not a great Shadow Step target as it is, unless you're getting something really huge. So Gabby kind of stagnating a little bit, but a lot about this matchup from the Rogue side is just keeping control of the board and getting in chip damage when you can. Wow. Untack picked up with some pretty good tools in hand. At least one 1-1 rusher. Bumper Car's decent. Troublemaker not as much. The buff is not as great there, but overall just having a big beefy rushman in that's kind of must kill is good enough.
McBanterface contemplating if it's valuable enough to play Bumper Car. When you have Runthok in hand, you're thinking about what's the best hand to buff, and having those Dark Moon Riders gain the buff is a little bit more efficient than the Bumper Car just because you get twice as many stat buffs. Slim pickings here for Gabby.
Yeah, it's not good. Again, Secret Passage being left with 3 mana is not really a good turn. Usually you want a Secret Passage when you can play one of your big things, or if you can hit field contact plus other things. Could be used as a desperate situation. Maybe to find Mankrik. Mankrik would be quite solid on this board. Or just some things that you can dump from your hand that you don't want to draw off the top. Foxy Fraud plus Swindle would have been a good combination, but you're only drawing 4 cards, so not the best at the end of the day. Overall, pretty lackluster.
And you can even see the effect of Jandice's nerf being very impactful as soon as next turn. Gabby not having access to that is going to make that tough in general to be able to play that, even if he drew that naturally. So it's one of these situations where Gabby is going to have to really hope that whatever he has available, if this board gets dealt with, is going to be enough moving forward.
Yeah, this is going to get out of control pretty quickly. With Runthak played and all of these buffed with a Playmaker in hand, even Parade Leader, though, likely won't come soon. McBannerface could go Runthak this turn, the next turn Playmaker, and then the triple the Riders, which would all summon copies of themselves. And they'd be buffed. A good way to kind of clear back the board. See though, maybe he wants something different. Could go Playmaker this turn, but Overlord Runthak's just too strong in this position with the way his hand's looking.
Yeah, it's got to be the Runthak. You're just getting +7/+7 to your hand.
That's insane.
It's ridiculous. It's ridiculous.
Yeah.
And, you know, Gabby doesn't even have a way to answer those rushers very easily when they start coming out in full force, because McBannerface even has the Parade Leader, right? So it's not like these 2/2s will trade just against, you know, the Vanessa Van Cleef, 1 for 2 or 2 for 1 rather on his side. The Riders will be able to trade in and kill everything just in one shot. And you have Playmaker to summon copies of it. It starts to get really wild. What I feel like is Gabby's playing a little bit straight up, right? Just playing minions that are very much expected to be at cost. And McBannerface has all these really insane, powerful tempo options to swing the board as soon as this turn. Does lack mana. That is the one limiting resource right now, but everything else is looking very good. So as long as he doesn't get overwhelmed too easily by taking it too slow, he's in a good spot.
Yeah, it's a little awkward here because no matter what he does, the trades are just slightly inefficient. He does have 6 2-damage worth of rush, but then, like you mentioned earlier, you'd have to kind of awkwardly trade into Vanessa Van Cleef and Bumper Car. At least he could value trade over the Bumper Car, but he's not going to be left with much. He's not going to be swinging back the board in his favor, judging by the plays that are available to him. But he can clear this board and stop this aggression. But yeah, I think basically just playing it too slow is the only worry here for McBanterface. Maybe he wants to go Playmaker, Parade Leader, and then 1/1's next turn, so kind of find a middle ground here. Okay, this works.
Yeah, it works. He was thinking about it for quite some time, but I'm okay with it.
Oh. Okay.
Rough draw here.
I thought he was going to go wide with 1/1s, but he can't let any of his Bumper Cars die. He can't get them to die because they don't trade over the Sword Eater well. And then use the Plunderer to get through. But that could be a nice kind of tempo play. Just flood the board with 1/1s and then Prize Plunderer once these 2 Bumper Cars die.
Right.
He is sticking some damage, which is relevant, even though Warriors obviously have armor up. They don't really have any cards in their deck that gain them armor. They have Alexstrasza that can gain them health in the later stages of the game, but if you can keep that chip damage rolling and then, you know, finish the game with your own Alexstrasza, that's a good win condition as well.
You aren't even ready for this. Here for a good time. Here for
I think the key is just setting up for that troublemaker like you were mentioning. Still also intimidating board. It feels like removing the playmaker's priority number one. Oh my goodness. And this is the downside of playing that Miracle Rogue. I mean, it's true to its name. There's a lot of cheap cards so you can pull off these crazy combinations with field contact, draw a full hand, keep it going. The next draw is going to be the one that saves you. But as a result, you are susceptible to hands like this. That is the downside of this deck. You can see that Gabby is just very uncomfortable. He's spending his mana. He has some hard turns. And he's doing okay, but 18 might be the high score here for Gabby soon because there's a lot of power still ready to go from McBannerface, even though it feels like his resources are thinning out. I just don't see how Rogue deals with Troublemaker.
Well, honestly, if there's any hand that can deal with Troublemaker, it's the one that Gabby has, but it would take his entire hand to deal with the Troublemaker and maybe not even deal with the 3/3s. He's got... all this is going to be free. So for 0 mana, he can play 5 cards, Shadowstep Plunder, another Penflinger. Like, he can deal with it just with the cards in his hand. But again, it's going to take all of it. He needs second Secret Passage. He needs Kazakus. Field Contact would be fantastic off the top right now. Pretty much anything to just try and make this hand go further. I'd even take a Swindle at this point, just because his hand is so cheap as it is. That is a Cold Neophyte, and because he has to spend his entire hand here to deal with the board, unless the very next card is Secret Passage and he can reload, I just don't think it's going to be enough at this point.
Yep, very much so. You want to use these tools to end with something really powerful. Usually, you can commandingly use the Prize Plunderer to swing the board and push damage. In this case, Gabby would just be using it to not take damage.
for a good time.
You have to kill Troublemaker because it just generates more threats.
Here for a good time.
And Robe's going to start burning here in a second, so you can tell he was trying to do the math in his head of how much it was going to take for him to actually get through this.
Well, this is good. 5 cards means that he can shoot the Troublemaker and then just trade everything in. You can also just use a Shadow Step here if he doesn't feel like he can get better value off of it. There's a high chance that he hits another dead card.
Give me that. Look what I want.
I mean, big threat dealt with, but his whole hand.
Stage Dive can pick up even more ridiculous, powerful stuff here from Banterface.
He has Tent Trasher, Samuro, and Rakara. Oh, and 1 Crab Rider left. There's Samuro.
Pretty good. Can use Parade Leader alongside that or Conditioning. Guess from McBannerface's perspective, Samuro could be still used reactively to deal with a Jandis board situation. Conditioning also gets a tick of power on turn 10, so maybe he wants to save that, instead go for the Parade Leader and 10 Thrasher. It's also more mana efficient, so there's a couple of reasons of why McBannerface might just hold here. Looks solid to me. I like taking the damage here as well. You know exactly the card in Gabby's hand. All right. I mean, that's something.
It's something. Still needs some gas here, though. Okay.
Okay.
Ogre, that's good. The one downside of taking damage Okay, Swamp
it
Thief.
draws a little bit more damage. Refreshing spring water?
It's okay. I'll take it. It's draw.
Yeah, look, we're at that territory where Gabby might be able to find burn. I was talking about how he might get stalled in the high teens of health for McBanner's face, but he still has all the damage in his deck for the most part. So, yeah, this might be doable.
If he hits spells. All right, that's a spell.
Wow.
It didn't hit a double spell, but... Okay.
Choose soon.
Is it Efficient Octobot, or is it the Swindle and get that card draw first? Because he can activate his Efficient Octobot with the Penflinger, but then what does Swindle being played now set up for him, right? Oh, actually, he was thinking about removing the Guardian Og Merchant because he wants to stall the amount of power on board, keep Olgra alive. Or will she stay alive?
Not going to.
Yikes.
And this will be a 2-turn lethal setup for sure from McBanterface. So it's going to come down to this final turn from Gabby to see if he can clear off enough stuff. But this is going to be very difficult. There's a lot of health on board. He's going to be very low because the ETC is going to give even more damage from each of these things. So can isolate a few things.
Alex with that draw.
And he's Brain Freeze. Not many cards left in the deck.
Right.
7 cards. Jandis, Kazakis, Field Contact, Wicked Step, Tenwu. Did he hit freeze?
Flurry? Snap freeze. So he can
Okay,
freeze two
Snap
things.
Freeze. Yep.
Oh, but I think ETC... ETC still presents lethal opportunity, right?
Well, you can Snap Freeze and Brain Freeze the 2 rushers.
Right. But, like, if McBannerface draws Rush.
It draws Rush, then yes. But there's not that many Rush minions left. There's a Crab Rider, a Rakara, and a Tent Master. There are 3 Rush minions. There's Athletic Studies too. There's 5 outs. It's a 1 in 3.
TJ, he can do it. McBannerface has to draw something or else he's dead. Right now.
There's not a Rush.
Oh my gosh. Gabby has somehow done it. One of the worst rogue panouts I've seen in a long time. And McBannerface just a couple of damage points short because he doesn't have Rush.
There was also Alex Straza. There was also potentially Troublemaker. There was also Sword Eater. That was nearly half the deck.
Surprised.
That was nearly half the deck that was lethal.
And you can tell that a guy like Gabby has played a lot of Hearthstone because victories like this feel so good, even better than being able to win that series. Game 1 feels like a tournament victory. What a first game bout between Gabby and McBanterface. That one is a game to remember. Extremely well played. You can see why there's a lot of hype behind this young guy from France. I mean, he's rank 1. He's perma rank 1 for a legend. He's gotten the respect of his peers and casters and colleagues around. And he has been hyped up as the next big thing in competitive Hearthstone in terms of just player caliber and skill. What a series of plays. And, you know, when you look at McBannerface...
This is the big turn right here. This is the big turn. Look. That swing right there. He had the Rush minion. He could have taken damage on his Tent Trasher. Right. Instead of going for the attack with his weapon. And that's pretty much what did it, right? That was the last Wicked Stab. He had Alex Straza for burn, but Gabby really had no gas left in his hand, in his deck, really. So that was, you know, in hindsight, it's hard to say, okay, that was the wrong play, right? But we can see that it would have made a difference because Gabby wasn't close to killing that 10 Trasher anyway. You know, he may have been able to in a situation like this, but it was frozen, so it wouldn't have mattered if it was dead or alive. But those kinds of decisions can come back to bite you, and that's an insane win because you're right. One of the worst panouts you can see. Good tempo earlier, and that chip damage is what you want. So it wasn't a terrible opening. He actually had things to do. The important part is that he did them. He didn't try and hold on to his resources. He didn't try and play it slow. He realized with this panout he had to go fast, and that's what he did.
Every card mattered, every turn mattered, every mana crystal mattered. Every single time that Gabby decided to push a little bit extra rogue damage dagger ended up adding up. And I mean, it was a tough matchup. Warrior is very favored versus Rogue on paper. If you look at the data, it's like a 2 to 1 favorite, right? Like 66.7% favored. I mean, that's a really dominant one-sided matchup if you just look at the stats. And to be able to do it in that way, really well done. But, you know, we have a best of 5, and a lot can happen. We're going to switch decks immediately for Gabby. As required, we are playing best of 5 Conquest, ban 1, priest band on both sides. Gabby turns to Spell Mage for game number 2. Spell Mage with no Deck of Lunacy. You'll be seeing this all throughout the weekend. Players who feel like it is fine to bring if you're trying to target certain classes and maybe use Deck of Lunacy in slower matchups, or perhaps in matchups that you feel like you can't win and you need a bailout. And then you have people who don't include it, just make a deck a little bit more consistent, instead teching in a little bit extra removal to ensure that you can survive versus aggression, because that does seem to be the only weakness of Mage for the most part. And then for McBanterface, you know, I think that you can see the pain kind of go through his eyes, because as he was going through his last couple turns, he was like, oh, I realize I can totally lose this, and I may have gotten a little bit too liberal with my life total. And that's some of the most painful exchanges there, when you realize that the entire series could be warped around that one game.
Yeah, it is honestly insane, though, that last turn, because even from that point, Gabby's unlikely to win. I counted at the end there. I showed the remaining cards just for a moment, but it was in the heat of the moment, so viewers may not realize it, but he had 15 cards left. Over half the cards in his deck represented lethal, or potential lethal in the case of second Troublemaker, with the Rush Minions, Athletic Studies, pretty much everything. There were so many cards in his deck that represented lethal damage, and it just so happened that Warmaul Challenger was one of the few that did not. So a big win, and now Gabby, that can be, from Gabby's perspective, the kind of momentum boost that can lead to a series just ending. And for McBanterface, I mean, he's an experienced player in his own right, so you have to let those not be tilters, right? And not look back at those and only look forward. And now we get to see the Mage in action once again versus Rush Warrior.
All right, see Gabby's old pictures before we started turning everything into online events, because that was the last time we were able to get that picture, that headshot. To see the growth and maturation of a lot of things, right? The maturation and growth of the scene, or certain players. But for Gabby, it's pretty fun because we got to see him at such a young age. So it's great to see him grow up like that. McBanterface staying on the Rush Warrior for game number 2. Taking a look at his options off of the Athletic Studies. Some okay choices. I think what he is really considering is the strongest possible plays that he can curve out and pressure the Mage. In a matchup like this, I'm willing to drop ETC on 2 and just try to play out my curve to try and pressure. But Gabby does have the Font of Power, which gives him targets to rush, which makes me reconsider. And McBanterface already introduced with some decisions here of how he wants to play his turn 2. He could choose to go for a rusher right now, set up his board, or he could just pass and take it really slow and hope that he has enough time and to be able to set up these waves of pressure against Gabby's threats in the mid game.
Yeah, ideally you'd like to wait for turn 5 for conditioning, just to get that additional buff, but his hand is already quite expensive, and he needs to just start spending his mana unless he wants to have a more of a dead turn moving forward once he has to actually play that conditioning. So just having big minions is decent, but at the same time, Mage is pretty good at getting rid of these big boards with powerful effects, with devolving missiles, combustions, and brain freezes. But this is going to start to get to be a pretty scary hand for Gabby to deal with, especially since he doesn't have Encounters Flow online. Everything's just so expensive, and still not at turn 5 yet for the possibility of a Pexus Blast to try and swing this board back. They're going to have to devolving here, and most likely will... Okay, never mind. If it was a bigger minion, maybe he would have had to play Combustion, but I think he's just kind of concerned about what can I do to make sure that a Pexus Blast next turn has the highest likelihood of giving me the board, at least for a turn.
Certainly.
Oh, okay. Stage Dive, I guess, could hit like Crab Rider or Rakara to be able to play this turn, but there's also more expensive rush minions in the deck. Blade Master Samuro as well.
I like the Fish Flyer here.
Yeah, it's pretty big.
It's, yeah, if you think about like what you're trying to do with Rush Warrior, part of the power of this deck is to overwhelm your opponent with a lot of stats on the board in quick succession. And for 4 mana, playing a 6/5 is very reasonable, right? Like, even with the accelerated amount of power that comes into the game in recent years, that's still considered to be very good. I mean, another pretty good card is Rakara here. I do feel like Rakara is also just very strong to threaten Gabby, and another like, hey, if you want to Pexus Blast, you got to Pexus Blast this, as opposed to the Fish Flyer, which I guess in the McBanter's Face's mind, Rakara was just a little bit of a better play. But, you know, having committed to the Stage Dive, needed to at least play something onto the board. Well, okay, all right. Krasnov, a Rusher minion, disabling the minion on the board.
Not too shabby.
Not too shabby, Mr. Gabby.
I like Gabby's finger guns whenever he plays something that he wants to have a really powerful effect. He did it last game with the Wand Thief as well. He plays it, and then while the animation's going, he gives a couple finger guns.
Yeah, it's very entertaining to watch.
Power
on
of his
stream.
random effects.
Well, what makes it fun is that a lot of Hearthstone players are quite stoic by nature. You know, you want to keep yourself calm, don't get rattled easily, keep your emotions in check. And Gabby brings that young gun energy, right? Like the finger guns, of course, but the idea that he's like this person really challenging from the bottom, climbing all the way to the top, and now is trying to really prove that it wasn't a fluke. And I think no one really doubts him at this point, especially his fans over in Europe region. I think a lot of people who may be just watching Grandmasters may not have really even heard of Gabby before, which is why we're introducing it.
Time runs out on me. I will crush your delusions of grandeur.
Okay.
But from here, McBanterface feels like his momentum has almost completely been lost. He set up like a conditioning Ranthuk series of plays that has not actually ended up into board advantage, and almost will have to rely upon the turning point being a troublemaker, because this double secret from Ring Toss introduced a lot of logistical issues. And now anything that McBanterface plays on the first turn with the Frisky Fisher, for example, the Fishy Flyer, for example, might end up just being copied and he has to trade it immediately.
Yeah, there's also an Oasis Ally. These are probably the two best secrets against Rush Warrior. A downside comes with the Astromancer Solarian cutting off Fonted Power and a Pexus Blast, but he's already used one of each of those, and Solarian Prime, especially in this matchup, when it's almost entirely about the board, is insane, right? In having the ability to try and clear things off. So McBanterface going to be able to deal with this board as much as possible, but at this stage in the game versus Mage, you want to be in the situation where you're person damage and not trying to clear the board. Okay, that could have been a reasonably big burn, but just Primordial Studies, which can actually be quite an impactful card. But I think in this situation, Gabby's happy to not see something even bigger burned off the top of the deck. Still faced with a pretty tough turn, though. Again, without Incanter's Flow played, having to play honestly, the mana can be an incredibly limiting factor. But is going to find a nice combustion clear. Fully spend the mana. Solarian Prime picked up for 9 to try and swing the board back, and that'll be right into the Troublemaker turn. This is usually a better spot than mages are in a lot of these scenarios with no Incanter's Flow opening. And this hand,
what does McBannerface even do, right? Like anything he sets up can now start to play into the reactive nature of Mage, and now Mage has unlocked almost all full mana crystals to be playing their ridiculous hand. This feels the position of power has completely shifted. While Warrior did have the early game advantage, it seems like Mage is not going to be threatened in the slightest here moving forward. So then how do you do this? And that's part of the problem with the Warrior deck, right? You mentioned the lack of reach, but it also kind of just lacks deviation of strategies. It's got very linear gameplay, which is I'm going to try and destroy things on your side of the board and build a bunch of stats. Maybe I swing to my face, swing with my weapon to your face a couple of times. Maybe I combo with ETC God of Metal, but like for the most part, it's pretty much just this. Big stats. Can you answer it? Yes? Okay, well, you got me. I have nothing else.
Yeah, big stats isn't enough in this day and age, Dan. You need more than just big stats. Oh, wow. Okay, finding an opening for Mozaki. Gabby actually has Mozaki, Devolving Missiles, and double Brain Freeze. So a lot of... All right. I guess it's Font of Power then, and then just Brain Freeze the Tent Trasher. You still get the additional spell damage, the same amount of spell damage that you would have if you double Brain Freeze. Don't get to clear the board, but that's still quite an impactful turn, and has options next turn as well. Biggest one probably being Solarian Prime, because that can just end games on the spot.
Yes.
But if Solarian Prime doesn't feel too fitting, then could always just try and clear things up with Mask of Cthulhu, Brain Freeze, etc. Especially if Mozaki lives, which it's Rush Warrior, very likely won't.
Yeah, Solarian Prime definitely took a step back in terms of power level when you remove things like the Frost Bolts and the Arcane Missiles to deliver a bunch of direct damage to your opponent, but still very solid.
And Puzzle Box of Yoxaron.
Yeah, that's fair too.
Here for a good time. Here for a
Yeah,
good
Gabby's still at
time.
28. Quite comfortable. Okay.
Here we go.
Well, he's going to think, because he
thinking
got a
about it.
Worm Reaver and a Ruined Orb, and he has Brain Freeze, so he could try and like clear the board, but nah, Solarian Prime.
It's prime time, baby.
Yep.
And good start.
Oh, there we go.
Potion of Illusion.
Oh, nope.
Gotta stop drawing cards.
Fireball, that's Burn. Grand Finale, okay, that's an 8-8.
Okay, big stats.
All in all-
Right back at you.
Yeah, but does leave 12 power on board. But McBannerface can't ignore it, because there's 15 power on Gabby's side, and he's at 21. He saw a Fireball burn, but there's a lot more of that came from in the deck. That's the issue with it. So Playmaker's left on board also, which normally would be quite a big deal, but McBannerface has a severe lack of meaningful rush minions. Can start to clear things off the board and maybe play like the buffed up Troublemaker that's on the far left. I'm pretty sure that Troublemaker is +2/+2, so I think it's an 8/10 from one Ranthak plus the conditioning.
For a good time. Here for a good time.
Yeah, I like it.
And
It's funny as Gabby could just keep this going, though.
Yeah.
Imagine he gets another grand finale.
I mean,
Summon
Gabby
two
could,
8/8s.
Gabby could very likely just kill McBanterface next turn because Solarian Prime with Mask of Cthulhu and Rune Orb to follow it up. That can be a lot of damage. If Solarian Prime clears some of the board, then you can clean it up and Mask of Cthulhu to finish it off. Seems pretty decent. Oh, face and that is not good. That is not good.
Okay. Elemental survives. You would like to have things like the Arcane Intellect.
Combustion, okay.
Combustion. Oh.
Oasis Ally, Rune Orb, okay. Fireball, okay. Face.
Oh my goodness. Wasn't face, but it targeted the best thing possible, which is just to kill off the minion.
Always hungry for
Yeah.
more.
This is bad.
No lead.
This is really bad for McBanterface. Gabby is completed his turnaround. He gave enough time to McBanterface. McBanterface even failed to clear the board. This is lights out. You can't stop the mage from this position, and he can completely freeze the board, set up these mana worms. There are 5 threats onto the field in their own right. And McBanterface can deal with 2 of them. I guess 3 if, 4 if the troublemakers go well. And that's it. Gabby is going to be able to take game 2. McBanterface taps out. 2 games of Rush Warrior, shown weakness on stream. It's not that Rush Warrior is a bad deck whatsoever, but it goes to show you why the deck hasn't actually fully taken over despite having a lot of momentum leading up into the balance patch. When it first dropped, people were saying, is this the new best deck in the game? And it was doing very well. Many people hit top 10 Legend with it. They were showing lots of promise, especially if you felt like it was good versus Paladin. But slowly but surely over time, I think we've started seeing that Warrior has, despite the fact that it's pretty consistent in its game plan, it has some consistency issues overall in the macro sense. It doesn't exactly put on pressure and follow up in the way that you expect it to if it gets wiped just like we saw it.
Yeah, I don't think it has consistency issues at all, Dan. It consistently loses when it falls behind.
Fair enough.
That's a trend, right? So, and I said it earlier, right? It's as soon as a list was figured out, the win rate stagnated, and usually win rates fluctuate over time if you're talking about a tier 1 deck because players are constantly making it better and making changes to be better against the meta. But Rush Warrior has largely just stayed the same since it became a deck. And that's not usually a good sign because it means that you found the maximum potential of it. But we'll see because now we're going to get a Rush Warrior mirror. Well, maybe. It depends if McBanterface decides to queue it up. And I think this is a 30 card for 30 card mirror. I'm looking at the list side by side right now, and it does seem like it. So again, you find the 30 cards and that's it. That's what you're working with. So this matchup can be really interesting, the Rush Warrior mirror, because you can play a couple different styles of it, right? You can play to be the player that's on board if you have the opening hand to be able to do it and just kind of ride the momentum. Or you can play for big swing turns because your deck is largely focused around rush minions. You can kind of hold things in your hand, wait for buffs of conditioning and Overlord Runthak, and then try and go for those swing turns. Blademaster Samuro does that well also, where if you can piece together certain hands, you can let your opponent flood the board with minions and then go for this big swing turn where you, get rid of a lot of their resources with very little of yours. So at certain points, it does come down to a resource battle. The deck kind of lacks in card draw outside of, Ringmaster Watley and Athletic Studies. And so if you're going card for card, then the player that can kind of eke out a little bit more value is oftentimes going to pull ahead since minions are just rushing into each other.
Well, we will see. Warrior versus Warrior coming up. Now, that being said, we drew attention to the fact that Warrior would potentially struggle in certain matchups, but there is one matchup that it does not tend to struggle in, and that is Rogue, which shows you the importance of McBanterface losing game 1. because of Rogue's popularity. It's carrying Warriors' win rate. If you remove Rogue from the equation, pretty middling, right, of the road, which is okay. It's a solid deck to bring for Conquest for sure. It absolutely is worthy of considering in most people's core 4 or core 3 decks, right? Right now, there's 3 classes that people universally want to bring, which is Priest, Rogue, and Mage, but people a lot of times want to ban Priest. Warrior is very much in contention for being able to enter that conversation as well.
It's kind of funny for WoW fans out there. We kind of have a WoW theme going on this year with the Master Swords being named after World of Warcraft cities, the expansions themselves being named after locations in World of Warcraft. Obviously, the game itself is from World of Warcraft, but they've strayed away from the lore. And now the 3 most popular classes in PvP, Rogue, Mage, Priest, which was for a very long time and still is sort of one of the most powerful and popular 3v3 arena compositions in World of Warcraft. Just dumping some WoW knowledge on you, Dan. I know you're not a WoW connoisseur yourself, though you've dabbled.
Yeah, I've dabbled. I played a lot during Legion, and I definitely tried out every expansion since then. But it's one of those things where I recognize that I just don't have enough time, and I know that WoW requires a lot of time, and it's just like addicting. And I remember I played the first time I sat down to really play WoW because I didn't have enough money to actually play when Vanilla came out back in the day. I sat and played for 8 hours. I'm like, oh, can't do this, dude. I just have too many things going on, and I enjoy video games a lot. And WoW's really fun. I just can't let it come into my life.
Dan, you're
not
so
WoW,
strong.
not even once.
You're so strong. Many have faced that same predicament and have not come out well on the other end. But you, my friend, you are a beacon of light.
That being said, I enjoy learning a little bit of the lore, so I appreciate that you share it with me. And it does not surprise me that those are some of the best classes, considering how ubiquitous they are for almost anything that you see when you walk around Azeroth. And that being said, as we stage dive back into this game, you might start to see a little bit of that back and forth that we described with that warrior. One of the most important things about warrior is how you can set up these swing turns in the matchup. And it really comes down to how do you utilize your hand buffs? When are you going to be utilizing these rushers? Which are you going to be prioritizing? And what do you bait out with? This looks like a really good Warmaw Challenger opportunity because it's just a very difficult mini to deal with early. I have to imagine that Gabby is looking for an opportunity to seize back the board soon.
Yeah, Gabby does have resource advantage, at least for the time being, especially being on the coin. The difficulty is going to come in his ability to find that definitive swing turn, right? Which it doesn't look like he has it yet. Still needs a buff. Does have Playmaker plus cheap rushers, but a conditioning would unlock this hand completely. Maybe even picking up the Overlord Runthak from the stage dive that's corrupted in his hand. Many ways to be able to do it, but he's got not a clear path to victory. It's a little too early to call that, but he once he does go for that swing turn, since McBannerface is falling behind on resources and is going to be in a position where he's probably going to be forced into that try and play for tempo role, then Gabby can make that swing and hopefully win the game off of it. Well, this is tougher. Labor Brute can offer a lot of tempo, especially with Rush Minions trading into each other. You can kind of curate the board to get that out for pretty cheap. But having a big Kargath Prime in your deck, and also being able to just play that for 3 mana this turn and trade off the board is quite enticing. And McBannerface is going to agree. Stage dive.
Yep, Gabby gonna first pick up card from the deck to see if that changes his play whatsoever. It does not. Now, I'm kind of wondering if Gabby should play anything here.
I don't think so, honestly.
Yeah, I agree. I think that this one-wall challenger, while very difficult to remove, also doesn't exactly threaten in a meaningful way. It's not really a matchup that 1 or 2 health decides things. It's one of those things where you end up losing the board very convincingly, and there's 20 power that's hitting you twice over 2 turns, and then you die. So I agree with this concept here from Gabby. Does not have a conditioning to really make his hand sing, but he's already gotten some nice value off of things like Stage Dive, which make this 10th Thrasher pretty powerful. Oh, it's the non-buff 10th Thrasher. But going back to basically what we were saying, which is that Gabby's keeping things neutral on the board, or slightly below neutral on the board. There's a 1 damage Warmaul Challenger.
He's just waiting for that card that's going to make this hand like actually playable, right?
Right.
Conditioning or run back effectively. I mean, there's also like the ability for him to go for like big ETC damage with this hand, but honestly, like you mentioned, Warmaul Challenger not threatening. There's no reason for him to really play anything because he's got the ability to clear off a lot of things just from hand each turn, and then as soon as he hits like that beefy card, the card that makes these minions powerful, conditioning, then he can really explode onto the board. And now it's another reason not to play anything, because now McBannerface is just kind of playing vanilla statted minions because they have rush.
Yeah.
But usually you want to be rushing for tempo and to protect these minions on board. He's trying to play rush minions as proactive minions, which is so much less effective in the grand scheme of things. And so it's kind of a difficult situation for both players where Gabby's still not picking up those cards that he needs to make this hand more powerful, but still doesn't feel like he wants to expend too many resources to try and take board back for himself.
When Rush Warrior was being played, I was chatting with one of my buddies and just trying to walk the deck. And when we were playing this matchup, I said one of the players has text or does not have text on the cards, and one of them does. Because that's what ends up happening with the rush dynamic. You end up playing it just on the board, doesn't do anything. Your opponent has words on their cards that can do things in response to your board. And as the player going second with the rush, you're more than happy to oblige. But as McBanterface, when you take this proactive stance, better make sure that you can make it count. Otherwise, you've just traded inefficiently at every juncture, because your opponent, who gets to react and target those minions, get the better trades almost every time. And now we see Parade Leader. Gabby has the ability to utilize these rushers and get maximum trade value. This is bad. You can see McBanterface already looking uncomfortable. Has the ability to, or rather, Gabby has the ability to really make this sting with the Dark Moon Riders and go in full force, but also has Playmaker and Rikara and has to kind of keep in mind what he wants to do in the following turns. This is really good as a start.
Yeah, but all of a sudden the roles have kind of swapped here. McBanterface with the Ringmaster Watley picked up, caught up in resources, and started presenting some threats that Gabby kind of needed to deal with because he just wasn't picking up anything that unlocked those cards. The Parade Leader was the best thing that he could do in that situation, but now McBanterface gets to just start making giant things. Can buff with Runthak, still trade off some minions. This bumper card was already buffed from the Stage Dive played earlier, so can easily clear off this board and have tons of follow-up that includes, but is not limited to, Kargath Prime.
Yeah, part of me was wondering if it was ever just play Kargath Prime in that spot. However, Gabby is in a position where, having used a lot of his rushers, this is the only thing about using those Dark Moon Riders, is that Playmaker becomes significantly worse. And so I think from Gabby's perspective, I would have liked to consider holding on to one of those at least, but you know, it's kind of hard to map out exactly how the board would look after that. Finds bumper car anyways. Huge Now his hand instantly refills, and he can clear off the board. I don't know if it was a guaranteed pickup off of the bumper cars.
No.
That was a really big pickup here.
Yeah, he still had quite a few Rush Minions left in the deck. Samuro, Runthak, Crab Rider, and then the bumper cars. So it was like a 1 in 4. Samuro would have been okay there as well, though not nearly as impactful as this one, I think, because like you said, it's also a hand refill, which is what he needed. Samuro would have felt like he was kind of wasted on that board, and Runthak wouldn't have even been playable with the mana that he had. So took the risk to try and go for that by corrupting it with Playmaker. But I don't think McBanterface is really worried about much here. He's got so much. He doesn't even have to worry about his life total because he's got that Karkath Prime. And that's conditioning now, going into turn 10 with the 1/1s in hand, or at least a couple now. So, and has Samuro with conditioning to pretty much completely clear up any board that Gabby can throw at him. Use the Alexstrasza, clear off Karkath Prime. That was the downside of it. But McBanterface can answer right back if he wanted to. Wait, how big would the Samuro be? Is that buffed at all right now? It's buffed by the Runthak, I know that, but
Yes.
I don't think it was picked up by Stage Dive. So I think right now it's just a 2/7. Conditioning would make it a 5/10. So it could be a clear for Alexstrasza, but I don't know if that's the most efficient way to do it, considering he knows that there's probably a way for Gabby to go wide anyway. I mean, these are 5/5s.
Yeah.
Oh, he could
Parade Leader
Samuro
just
the
a
1/1.
little bit. Yeah, could end up using Parade Leader and Sword Eater with the Dark Moon Rider. That's enough to actually kill the Alexstrasza. You can save the Samuro for a decisive board swing.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is the state of which we're talking about. Now the roles have completely reversed. You described the turning point, and now we are here halfway through it. McBanterface the one. His turn to throw wildly overstated minions at his opponent. Oh.
Okay. I like this. This is like the most power on board, and he's still over 30 even if he attacks this Alexstrasza, so he feels fine to use his life total as a resource. Has Alexstrasza followed up. Does it set up lethal? 11 plus 3.
Wow.
14. Yeah.
Really well done by McBanterface. Going to take game number 3. Being able to get past that hump. But, you know, we talked a little bit about the struggles of the Warrior when it doesn't really draw those power cards like conditioning, and you saw what it can do with it, right? So
yeah.
McBanterface finally able to get the win. Does still have that rogue up, which is going to be a little bit tricky. And I am curious about Paladin, right? Like the sentiment is that the matchup against Paladin is starting to turn. It's not nearly as effective as it used to be. So it's not going to be decided one way or the other. It's going to come down to the wire and potentially down to that Warrior versus Rogue on Gabby's side.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? Paladin has gone more buff heavy, which you're even further incentivized to not lose the board early. If you do lose the board at any point, you usually don't have the ability as a Rush Warrior to deal with a Blessing of Authority minion, no matter what it is. And then you just start to fall behind. So it is an interesting matchup. I wonder, the Rogue matchup's going to be, I think, like one of the biggest, because obviously that's Gabby's best matchup that remains. And we have a weird situation in our hand where it's possible for Rush Warrior to be the deck that loses every single game in this series. If McBanterface manages a reverse sweep, it's just both Rush Warriors kind of being targeted, and then it literally just came down to the mirror. Be interesting when we get to that point, but we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. For now, take a look at the Aggro Paladin. We call it Aggro Paladin, but like Buff Paladin might be even better. It's basically just a bunch of sticky Death Rattle Divine Shield minions in the early game, and then a bunch of ways to buff them in the mid stages of the game with Conviction, Blessing of Kings, Blessing of Authority, and some healthy top end as well. Moonfang making an appearance in the Aggro Paladin for McBanterface, and then rolling down to Hammer the Gnar and Alexstrasza it's kind of a crazy deck because even if you manage to get through the early game, late game can still be difficult to handle for the deck, and they can piece together large amounts of damage if given the opening to do so.
Yes, very much so. Aggro Paladin, Egg Paladin. Some people like calling it like a fast mid-range Paladin in a way. I mean, there was variants that were playing Karen Bloodhoof, for example, as like, you know, just keeping itself on curve. And they just started cutting it and being a little bit more like, why don't we just play Karen Bloodhoof at 2 mana, which is the Nerubian Egg, and so on and so forth. It's a very powerful archetype for sure. And we've seen that because of the fast nature of it, if Warrior just doesn't have enough time to set up their really powerful swing turns, then it might not matter if they do end up getting all of their rush tools when they're just basically going to die. Not to mention that if you talk about Crab Riders, there's no class that is able to abuse Crab Rider the way Paladin is right now, by being able to get out very cheap buffs and make this Rush Wind Fury minion absolutely unstoppable.
Yeah, Crab Rider can just end games if left on the board for even a turn. Pretty crazy. And McBannerface has an opening along with First Day of School. But Mesh Samuro, Cariel Rome, they do have certain spots where they're good, but I imagine it's just going to be the far cards in the far end that are kept. And Gabby really just looking... Okay, McBannerface has got that, or if anything sticks, I win kind of hand. Gabby, his hand is quite good. Bumper car into Warmaw Challenger. That's how you fight for board early, starting off with the Imprisoned Gnarg. Oh, Bladed Cultist!
Wow.
Juice.
Zombie Chow is back. An old 1-mana 2/3 card that had Death Rattle restore health to your opponent hero. Now with no downside if you combo it off of one First Day at School. Moonfang takes me back. Card was so last week. Although Moonfang is still pretty powerful, you can buff it. Especially against Rush Warrior that tends to do things in big chunks of damage. Ends up being a very good card in this matchup in particular.
Let me
Yeah, I mean, a lot of decks, right? It can be incredibly difficult to get off the board. But Warrior, you're right, in particular. I mean, this is a pretty powerful hand as far as card quality goes, but no real ways for McBannerface to kind of push the issue, because he's got 3 5-drops in hand with coin, but 3 5-drops, and the Novice Zapper that he picked up off the First Day of School along with the Bladed Cultist does overload, which is not something you want to do when your hand is already this expensive. He's going to struggle to find ways to utilize this. And I like this trade just to make sure that he keeps as much health as possible onto the Crab Rider to see if it'll stick. But Gabby's got plenty of ways to deal with this. Warmaw Challenger being the big one.
I challenge you to Moscow!
Yeah. Prioritizing killing off both minions to deny any opportunity for Blessing of Kings.
Now, this hand got terrible real quick. This is feels like a pass almost.
I mean, this is one of the downsides of having heavier cards like Moonfang in your lineup and less on the lower curve in order to assure that you have board control. This is entirely why those cards that are a little bit more expensive, you say like, oh, what's the harm, right? Having like 1 or 2 cards that are a little bit heavier handed. It's for exactly this situation, TJ.
Yep.
I wonder.
Yeah, at this point, McBannerface might have to go for some type of like Samuro game plan, like hold on to resources and use that to get back on board. But it's so far away because Samuro, just with Conviction, is not that strong, right? It'll remove a good chunk of stuff, but it's not like the most powerful use of it. Yeah, he just has to hear power pass. Gabby gives the smirk. He's like, yep. 4-mana 10 Trasher. All right, pick it up, put it down.
Seems good.
Seems great.
Right, Militia Commander is back in full force. A little bit extra oomph to it. Speaking of oomph. What does McBannerface choose to do here? Is it the Blade Master Samuro? Is it the Moonfang?
I think it's Samuro and Conviction, right? He can attack it into, it'll have 4 attack. He can attack it into the Warmaw Challenger. It'll clear the board and leave him with a 4/5 that he can then Blessing of Authority next turn, should it get removed. Or just play Moonfang, but Moonfang a little bit weaker when played when you're behind. I just don't think McBannerface has any other options because his deck completely relies on the board.
Job done.
It is what it is. Bannerface going to clear off the board with the Conviction. Notice that 2 of the cards are Darkmoon Riders, so it should be thinner. Oh my goodness. More things to buff with the conditioning. Finds the Crab Rider.
Oh, it's so large.
Huge.
It's so large.
And what does McBannerface have? He's got Moonfang. Let's go Dragon Tamer. Not going to do enough here.
I mean, Bumper Car is a great way to deal with Moonfang. It deals with it by itself with just a single card, effectively.
Here for a good time.
And then can dump one of these 3/3s alongside, push 10 points of damage, and has 16 represented. So it's nearly lethal being represented on board. Actually, yeah, it is lethal being represented on board because he gets to play both of the 3/3s.
Correct.
But McBannerface doesn't find a way to clear one of these things. Oh!
Okay. That's huge. Gives him a much needed shot in the arm.
I mean,
Master Watley. I mean, that's more ammo. And here we get to the point where Paladin might be at a point of no return. Because if if things get within Alex Straza range, he's just going to die on 9.
yep.
His hand from McBannerface just not giving him much to work with here. I just Protector.
Oh.
Okay. Okay.
Pop a Blessing of Authority on it. You probably have to play Novice Zapper as well.
Let me think.
Bigger question, McBannerface now knows that Alex Straza is in hand. So, unless he's setting up a 2-turn lethal, he cannot take this damage. He just has to hope that the Blessing of Authority is getting there, that the rest of the hand is pretty weak. He actually has a good idea of what Gabby's hand contains because of the Ringmaster Watley.
Right.
picked up 2
Okay.
cards.
Athletic Studies finds
Well,
Rusted Raider, which is just a little bit short. Oh, the Rapid.
I challenge you to Makara!
Oh, I forgot the Warmaw Challenger got buffed as well.
it's a 3/12.
And now you set it for the lethal. Oh, it's so brilliant. And now Gabby has the 2-turn set up. McBannerface knows. Pretty big disappointing moment. He has no way to gain life. That is one thing Paladin can't do, is heal. And McBannerface is done. Gabby has closed the series 3-1. A valiant effort. Overall, it just seemed like a lot of momentum was sat from McBannerface from game number 1, and that's not really a detriment to McBannerface. Maybe 1 or 2 small mistakes that created openings for Gabby that he has capitalized, and a player of his caliber is not going to skip a beat. Gabby improves to 2-0. The little wave goodbye to the camera, because for now we're going to say bye to him and focus on other people in round 2. But man, what a round from the youngster from France. Really impressive stuff from Gabby. And McBannerface, I hope we see, come back. Obviously showed some good plays, like, in tight corners. I wasn't sure how he'd be able to swing it, but, game 3 was a good example of how he recognized what he's supposed to do with the deck. And overall, I was really happy with that series, TJ. Any thoughts?
Yeah, it was a solid series, and you know, from Bannerface's perspective, if you're going to lose to any player in a Masters Tour, it may as well be Gabby, right? Because he's one of the highest win rate players across the Masters Tour that we have. He's will be a GM someday candidate for pretty much all of the top level players in Europe. It's just a matter of time, right? Is it going to be this Masters Tour that puts him over the edge? Is it going to be the next one? So a tough series to have to play so early on from Bannerface, but I think his lineup's there. He's lacking Mage, I believe, in his lineup, which if I was playing in the Masters Tour, my lineup would not lack any Mages. But I like where he's going with kind of aggressive themed. I think his Paladin, again, I said at the beginning of the series, I've swiped some